On December 12, 1993, CBS broadcast a made-for-TV adaptation of the Broadway musical Gypsy. The telefilm was a ratings success and would earn Bette Midler a Golden Globe. It was credited with bringing the TV musical back from the dead. Almost 10 years later, musicals would receive a similar revival on the big screen, with the film adaptation of the Broadway musical Chicago. The film would be the first musical to win the Oscar for Best Picture in 34 years. These two landmark achievements shared a common link: executive producers Craig Zadan and Neil Marin. Smack in the middle of Gypsy and Chicago would come another Zadan-Marin production that would reimagine a classic fairy tale and impact a generation. This was Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella. In the 1950s, the world of entertainment was still dominated by musical theater. Television adaptations of popular Broadway titles began airing throughout the decade. One of the most popular was Peter Pan, starring Mary Martin. The musical aired on NBC in 1955 and was viewed by a then record 65 million people. NBC was hungry for another hit, so they approached the songwriting team of Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein. Rodgers and Hammerstein were the kings of Broadway, having written such massive hits as Oklahoma, Carousel, South Pacific, and The King and I. However, NBC wasn't interested in adapting one of their musicals for the small screen. Instead, they wanted Rodgers and Hammerstein to write a new musical, made specifically for TV. The pair came up with adapting the classic children's fairy tale, Cinderella. After further development and a change of broadcasters, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella would air live on CBS on March 31, 1957. Julie Andrews, who was still starring as Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady on Broadway, starred as Cinderella. The broadcast was seen by over 100 million people, 60% of the U.S. population at the time. It was the largest television audience in history when it premiered. 8 years later, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella returned to CBS with an all-new production, this time starring Leslie Ann Warren. Once again, the audiences tuned in and broke records. It was the highest-rated non-sports special on CBS until 2009. The special was rebroadcast 8 times over the years and became a yearly tradition for families to watch together. Fast forward to 1993. Gypsy has just premiered on CBS to rave reviews and high ratings. Executive producers Craig Zadan and Neil Marin are riding high, and CBS is ready to see what they had planned next. Enter Whitney Houston. Houston was one of the 26.2 million viewers that tuned in to Gypsy, and she wanted in. Houston had made her acting debut in the box office hit The Bodyguard a year earlier. Neil Marin suggested an updated Cinderella with Houston starring in the title role. Houston liked the idea, but with her busy schedule found it difficult to fully commit to the project. Meanwhile, over at Disney, CEO Michael Eisner was interested in reviving the wonderful world of Disney on the recently acquired ABC. Eisner didn't want to kick off the revival with just any movie. He wanted an event. He reached out to Zadan and Marin, who pitched the Whitney Houston-led Cinderella to Eisner. Eisner loved the idea and committed to making Cinderella the program that would relaunch the wonderful world of Disney. Now they just had to get Whitney Houston to commit to making it. In 1995, a private reading of Robert Friedman's teleplay was held in New York so that Whitney Houston could hear the script performed out loud. Broadway stars like LaShawns, Brian Stokes Mitchell, and Dana Ivey were in the cast of the reading. Houston loved the script and finally committed to making Cinderella and producing it along with her partner Deborah Martin Chase. Houston and Chase would go on to produce The Princess Diaries 1 and 2 and the first two Cheetah Girls films for Disney, as well as what would be Houston's final project, Sparkle. By the time everything was being finalized for Cinderella, Houston felt she was too old for the role. As Deborah Martin Chase recalls, we both knew that everyone still had images of Diana Ross, who was a little too old to be playing Dorothy in The Wiz, so Whitney and I decided she would play the fairy godmother instead. So the script was rewritten, and the focus moved to finding the right person to play Cinderella. Enter Brandy Norwood. Brandy Norwood, who went simply by Brandy, was already a megastar by the time Whitney Houston called on her to star in Cinderella. She released her self-titled debut album in 1994. The album went quadruple platinum, selling 6 million copies worldwide. By 1996, she was starring in the hit UPN comedy Moesha, which ran for 6 seasons and spawned the spin-off The Parkers. She was the true definition of a star. Still, when Houston called Brandy asking her to star in Cinderella, Brandy could hardly believe it, especially when Houston explained that she'd be playing the fairy godmother. As Brandy recalls, "I screamed at the top of my lungs and ran all around my house. I left Whitney Houston on hold." Cinderella had found its star. The producers were thrilled to have Brandy join the production, but not everyone behind the scenes was so happy. Craig Zadan admits that one particular Disney executive was nervous about casting a black Cinderella and pushed hard for the team to consider pop singer Jewel for the role instead. Zadan and the team refused. "We said absolutely not. The whole point of this whole thing was to have a black Cinderella. We didn't want to make it with a white Cinderella. We weren't interested in a white Cinderella. We never approached anyone other than Brandy for the role, and Jewel was never approached." Now that the two leads were locked down, work began on casting the rest of the movie. The team knew from the start that they wanted to have a multicultural cast, but that provided casting with a number of challenges. For one, no white actresses wanted to play the evil stepmother. Bette Midler was approached, but she didn't like the optics of being mean to a black Cinderella. After multiple no's from multiple actresses, Zadan and Marin reached out to Broadway legend Bernadette Peters, and she immediately said yes. She wasn't concerned with the optics. She just wanted to give her all and deliver a great performance. Film actress Natalie Desselle and Broadway actress Vianne Cox were cast as Minerva and Calliope, Cinderella's wicked stepsisters. Desselle was featured in the film How to Be a Player and starred alongside Halle Berry in Babs. Cox was fresh from playing Amy in the 1995 Broadway revival of Company, for which she received a Tony nomination. According to director Robert Iscove, there was just something magic between Vianne Cox and Natalie Desselle when they read together. We all kind of looked at each other and said, "Look no further. That's it." Jason Alexander was cast as Lionel, the royal assistant. Audiences knew Alexander as George Costanza in the hit NBC comedy Seinfeld. He also proved himself to be a song and dance man in the 1995 ABC adaptation of the Broadway musical Bye Bye Birdie. Julie Andrews was at the top of the list to play the Queen, as she had originated the role of Cinderella in 1957. However, Andrews had recently experienced vocal trauma due to a botched surgery, so she would not be able to participate. Instead, the role went to Oscar winner Whoopi Goldberg. Goldberg had been approached early on in the casting process to play the evil stepmother, but she was busy at the time. But Goldberg recognized the importance of what was being done, so she worked things out and signed on to play the Queen. Goldberg recommended actor Victor Garber for the role of the King. Garber was a Broadway veteran who was just making a name for himself in TV and film at the time. Goldberg and Garber were old friends and had great chemistry on screen.
So many beautiful girls. He'll find the one he's looking for tonight, I'm sure of it.
And if he doesn't?
This ball will never end.
I don't think we ordered enough food.
What?
The last role left to cast was The Prince. The team saw many actors on the verge of becoming household names, like Wayne Brady and Taye Diggs, who was starring in Rent on Broadway, but no one seemed quite right. A young actor named Paolo Montalbán would be the last person to audition for the role. Montalban was performing in the ensemble of the 1996 Broadway revival of The King and I, and had come straight from understudy rehearsal the day of the audition. As soon as Montalban opened his mouth to sing, the team fell in love with him. Cinderella had found her prince. Before filming began, the cast hit the studio to record the film's soundtrack. The score was given a fresh update by music supervisor Paul Bogave, but the Rodgers and Hammerstein estate was careful not to let the team get too carried away with revisions. A few songs from other Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals were interpolated into the movie. The sweetest sounds came from the musical No Strings, which starred Diane Carroll on Broadway. In the original Cinderella, the evil stepmother didn't have a song, but with Bernadette Peters in the role, the team found it necessary to give her one. They chose Falling in Love with Love, a song from the Rodgers and Hart musical The Boys from Syracuse. There Is Music in You, sung by Whitney Houston in the film, was pulled from the movie Main Street to Broadway starring Mary Martin. The film also features Rodgers and Hammerstein playing themselves.
Someone wants you, you know who. Now you're living, there's music in you.
The song also featured a bit of One Foot, Other Foot from the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical Allegro.
Now you can go wherever you want to go.
Now you can go wherever you want to go. Now you can do whatever you want to do.
Legendary Broadway lyricist Fred Ebb also contributed to the revised score by writing new lyrics for The Prince is Giving a Ball, which needed to be expanded from its original version. Whitney Houston and Brandy recorded their music together for the song Impossible. After hours of singing, their voices were shot, but the team needed Houston to sing a big final note for the song. Later, during an ADR session, the team asked Houston if she would sing the note for them there. Without warming up at all, Houston belted the high D needed for the end of the song, and that's what's heard in the final version of the film. Filming for Cinderella began in July of 1997 after 8 weeks of rehearsal. Robert Iscoe directed the massive production, with Rob Marshall choreographing. Marshall would go on to direct Annie for ABC, his second time working with Craig Zadan and Neil Marin. His third time would be as the director of Chicago, for which he'd receive an Oscar nomination for Best Director. If it weren't for his work on Cinderella, Marshall may have never developed a relationship with Zadan and Marin, and the revival of movie musicals on the big screen may have never happened. The movie was shot on the Little Europe backlot at Universal Studios and the sound stages at MGM, the same sound stages where The Wizard of Oz was filmed nearly 60 years before. The sets and costumes were designed to be as saturated with color as possible to evoke the feeling of a storybook come to life. Everyone on set knew that they were making something very special. However, the production was not without its challenges. As production neared its end, the film's budget was dried up, leaving the producers with no money to pay the extras needed for the final scene. The same Disney executive who wanted Jewel to play Cinderella was unwilling to give the $12 million production any more money, even though there was only 1 day of filming left. Whoopi Goldberg even sent an envelope of cash from her per diem to the executive with the note, "Here's my contribution for the extras for the last day." Goldberg's stunt didn't persuade the executive, so Craig Zadan, Neil Marin, and Deborah Martin Chase ended up paying for the last day out of pocket. Finally, after years of development, 2 months of rehearsal, and 28 days of shooting, production on Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella was complete. Disney threw a red carpet premiere party for Cinderella at the Grauman's Chinese Theater on October 13, 1997. Brandy and Paolo Montalban arrived to the premiere in a horse-drawn carriage, creating a true Cinderella moment. The cast and production team were excited but nervous to see the final product and eager to see what audiences would think. It exceeded their wildest expectations. Reception to the film's premiere was rapturous. The audience burst into applause at the end of every song and rose to their feet to give the film a standing ovation at the end. The reception was so strong Disney considered releasing the film theatrically, but after holding a test screening, producer Deborah Martin Chase says, "We found out pretty quickly that what people would buy on television was still harder when you put it in theaters." And so Cinderella prepared for its debut on ABC.
The moment you've been waiting for has finally arrived.
I wish I could go to the ball.
And now, Whitney Houston, Jason Alexander, Whoopi Goldberg, Bernadette Peters, and Brandy in the television event of the year, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella.
On November 2nd, 1997, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella premiered on the Wonderful World of Disney. Just as the 1957 broadcast of Cinderella broke records, so did ABC's broadcast 40 years later. An estimated 60 million people watched the updated Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, making it the most watched television musical in years. Of all the TVs in America, at least 31% of them were tuned in to Cinderella that night. The telefilm was nominated for 7 Primetime Emmy Awards, winning 1 for Best Art Direction. Brandy performed the sweetest sounds at the ceremony. The success of the film led Disney to produce more made-for-TV musicals, including Annie starring Victor Garber and Kathy Bates, Geppetto starring Drew Carey and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, The Music Man starring Matthew Broderick and Kristen Chenoweth, and Once Upon a Mattress starring Carol Burnett and Zooey Deschanel. Demand for a home video release was strong following the film's premiere. Disney had never released one of their TV movies on home video before, and big stores like Walmart and Blockbuster were reluctant to promote the video, but Disney threatened to allow other chains to receive their products first if the stores didn't promote Cinderella. Their tactic worked. Cinderella was released on home video on February 10, 1998, and sold 1 million copies in its first week. The following February, Cinderella had sold 2 million copies, making it the highest-selling home video release for any made-for-TV movie at the time. The film had been one of the most expensive TV movies ever, and one of the most successful, too. 1997's Cinderella has remained in the public's consciousness for over 20 years. The film made an impact on an entire generation and still inspires people today. Fans pay tribute to the movie through fan art, cosplay, and even song remixes. The movie remains a popular talking point on social media. When controversy arose over Halle Bailey being cast as Ariel in the live-action remake of Disney's The Little Mermaid, many people rose to her defense by referencing Brandy as Cinderella. Broadway stars, movie stars, and pop stars alike share a love for the movie. In 2019, Chance the Rapper released his debut studio album, The Big Day, which included the song Zanies and Fools. The song's title is a direct reference to the song Impossible from Cinderella, and even samples a bit of the song in its chorus. When Chance the Rapper performed the song on SNL, he prefaced it with an animated video of his daughter singing Impossible. So why has a made-for-TV movie made in 1997 endured for so long? For those who grew up with the film, Cinderella represents a time when truly anything seemed possible. A black girl with braids could be a princess. A black queen and a white king could have a Filipino son. It represents the world every child imagines when they still believe they can fly. A world full of color and enchantment, where nothing was truly just black or white. It's a world that fans of the film still long to live in to this day. Despite Cinderella's enduring popularity, the movie's soundtrack has never been released. Negotiations between Whitney Houston's record label, Arista, and Brandy's record label, Atlantic, caused the soundtrack to never see the light of day. According to Deborah Martin Chase, Atlantic thought that it would hurt Brandy's recording career because it was so poppy and mainstream, and they were really focused on selling her as an urban artist. Studio tracks have leaked over the years, but an official soundtrack has never been available for purchase. This was something that saddened Whitney Houston, who told Craig Zadan the year before her tragic death that her favorite project in her career was Cinderella, and the biggest heartbreak of her career was Cinderella, due to the album never being released. Hopefully, someday, Whitney's wish will come true. Cinderella's impact is hard to overstate. The film didn't just challenge conventions, it broke them wide open. It let black kids everywhere know that yes, they too could be royalty. Yes, they too could be in a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. And yes, their lives mattered. In September 2014, Keke Palmer became the first black actor to play Cinderella on Broadway. She said in an Instagram post that when Brandy played Cinderella, I was able to believe that I could play her on Broadway. For Craig Zadan and Neil Marin, Cinderella proved that they were more than one-hit wonders. They'd go on to produce many hit movie musicals, and in 2013 revived the live TV musical. They continued working together up until Craig Zadan's sudden passing in 2018. For Deborah Martin Chase, Cinderella is a project that remains close to her heart. Cinderella embodies everything that I got into this business to do. The fact that it's still very much beloved and influencing generations, that's the dream come true out of all of this. I'm still so proud of it, and I know Whitney would be too. Despite being one of Disney's most successful and important TV movies, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella cannot be found on Disney's streaming service, Disney+. In fact, the movie has not been available in any capacity digitally since the film was released. The only way to view the film legally today is to buy the DVD, which was released in 2003 and is in desperate need of a picture quality upgrade. Disney must recognize the impact the film has had, as two of the iconic costumes from the film designed by Ellen Mirojnick were on display at the 2019 D23 Expo and featured in the book The Art of Disney Costuming. Disney has yet to explain why the film is not featured on Disney+, but as someone who fondly remembers watching Cinderella with their family on November 2, 1997, my dream is that Disney is working on the digitally remastered version of the film to be released alongside the long-awaited soundtrack for the film's 25th anniversary. Maybe that dream is just Falderal and Fiddly-Dee, but as Cinderella taught us, impossible things are happening every day.
It's possible for a plain yellow pumpkin to become a golden carriage. It's possible for a plain country bumpkin and a prince to join in marriage.
And for white mice are easily turned to horses.